Welcome to today's program. My name is Erin Payton, and I'm the Executive Director of the 19th Century Charitable Association, which is located in Oak Park, Illinois. Our mission is strengthening our community through learning, giving, and the sharing of our landmark building. We're so happy to have you today on our first program of 2021, and it's a great one. Before I give a good bio of the two women who we're going to be seeing today, I just want to let you know that something today might spark a question or a comment. And if you want to pose those to Elizabeth and Rachel, you can. You can put that in our chat or our Q&A. And if we have time at the end of the program, we will unmute you and you can ask us questions yourself. But before we do that, we got to learn about our program people today. Elizabeth Berg is the New York Times bestselling author of more than 30 books, including Open House, an Oprah Book Club selection, Durable Goods, and Joy School, both selected as ALA Books of the Year. And most recently, the Arthur Trilogy, the story of Arthur, True Love, Night of Miracles, and the Confession Club. She adapted The Pull of the Moon for the stage and sold out performances in Chicago and Indianapolis, and 3 of her novels have been adapted for television movies. Elizabeth is the founder of Writing Matters, who is co-presenting today's program with us, and it's dedicated to serving author, audience, and community. A memoir of her parents, I'll Be Seeing You, was published in 2020. In addition to being a novelist, Rachel Joyce has written over 20 original afternoon plays and adaptations of the classics for BBC Radio 4, including all of the Bronte novels. She moved to writing after a long career as an actor, performing leading roles for the Royal Shakespeare Company, the National Theatre, and Cheek by Jowl, all in her native England. And now...
Thanks, Erin. I wanted to say, first of all, thank you so much for coming, Rachel, which I've already told you, but I could tell you about 50 more times. It's such a pleasure. I'm a big fan, and this is going to be one of my favorite things ever. I want to say to those who don't know that I began Writing Matters because for me as a reader, what matters most is the writing. I like a good story as much as the next person, but it has to be good writing or I'm going to not finish it. Rachel Joyce is a beautiful writer. She doesn't know how to do bad sentences, and she's one of the few authors about whom I can say, if people say, well, which one should I read? I can honestly say any of them. They are all wonderful. But if you do want to read The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry, read that first, and then there's a companion book, The Love Song of Queenie, Hennessy. So read them in that order. Otherwise, you will not be disappointed. I always also say in these programs that we are living in tough times, and that's about all we're going to say about that, except to say there's this wonderful thing called compartmentalization, where I'm going to ask you to leave behind everything else and just be here now, because it's going to be wonderful to hear from this author. And it's also going to be wonderful to leave a lot of stuff behind, if you know what I mean. So, Rachel, since 2012, you've written 5 novels and a collection of short stories. You have done over 30 plays, I think it is. And you, yes?
Not in the last 5 years, but over time, yes.
Yes, and in the last 5 years, you've been doing all these books. So although I do really love them all, I've read them all, I love them all, we're going to only talk about The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry. That was your first novel, and Miss Benson's Beetle, which is your most recent. As of this morning, I think you don't check this stuff, but I did. There were 9,587 really positive reviews on Amazon for Harold Fry. That's a lot. That's a lot of reviews.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, well, it's probably gone up since we started the show, but you were longlisted for the Booker for that novel. and you were also awarded New Writer of the Year by the National Book Awards. Was that a complete and utter surprise to you, or did you have a sense when you were writing it, I think this is pretty good?
I never have a sense that it's really good, or, or what's going to happen. But I do have a sense that I believe in it. And I did with Harold Fry. I felt that what I was saying felt very important to me, and it felt quite pertinent at the time. It sort of still does a bit, that idea of not of walking out of things, but of going with very little, walking away from the stuff and the things that you think that you need. Those ideas felt very alive for me then, and they still feel alive for me now. And I think they feel alive for other people. Something that happened afterwards, I didn't see any of that coming. For me, getting a publishing deal was the big thing. That was the thing, because I've loved books, since I was a child, and wanted to publish a book since I was a child. So to actually arrive there was, it was glorious. It was one of those moments where you think, I'm just going to really stop and think how happy and lucky I am.
Yeah. One thing I really loved among the bazillion things in Harold was that notion that I think we all have sometimes. What if I just kept going? What if I just started walking away? And we don't do it, but he does, and for very specific reasons, as it turns out. It's a book that once you finish reading it, you want to read it again. You want to hold it to your heart. You know how you feel about books sometimes, that they just become like one of your children or something. You want a t-shirt, you want a Harold Fry t-shirt. And so I think I'd like to ask you to do a little reading from that book, just to give people who might not have read it a taste.
Sure. So I've got my English copy, so it's a bit different. But this is kind of one of the things that started the book off, I think, with these shoes on the front. It was a very different cover at the time, and it's amazing. And I'm sure you must have views about this as well. But what difference the book jacket makes. But it's sort of, I think those little shoes set him off very well. So anyway, the bit I thought I'd read is quite early on, when Harold kind of makes the decision. Insofar as he makes the decision, he realizes he's going to do the walk. And it comes very early on, when he's making a phone call to the hospice where Queenie, his friend who's written him a letter to say that she is dying, is now sort of staying. After 10 rings, there was at last a clunk, and a heavily accented voice said, "St. Bernardine's Hospice, good afternoon." He said, "I'd like to speak to a patient, please. Her name is Queenie Hennessy." There was a pause. He added, "It's very urgent. I need to know that she's all right." The woman made a sound as if she was breathing out a long sigh. Harold's spine chilled. Queenie was dead. He was too late. He clamped his knuckle to his mouth. The voice said, "I'm afraid Miss Hennessy is asleep. Can I take a message?" Small clouds sent shadows scurrying across the land. The light was smoky over the distant hills, not with the dusk, but with the map of space that lay ahead. He pictured Queenie dozing at one end of England and himself in a phone box at the other, with things in between that he didn't know and could only imagine. Roads, fields, rivers, woods, moors, peaks and valleys, and so many people. He would meet and pass them all. There was no deliberation, no reasoning. The decision came in the same moment as the idea. He was laughing at the simplicity of it. Tell her Harold Fry is on his way. All she has to do is wait. Because I am going to save her, you see. I will keep walking and she must keep living. Will you say that? The voice said she would. Was there anything else? Did he know visiting hours, for instance? Parking restrictions? He insisted, "I'm not in a car. I want her to live." I'm sorry, did you say something about your car? I'm coming by foot from South Devon all the way up to Berwick-upon-Tweed. The voice gave an exasperated sigh. It's a terrible line. What are you doing? I'm walking, he shouted. I see, said the voice slowly, as if the woman had picked up a pen and was jotting this down. Walking, I'll tell her. Should I say anything else? I'm setting off right now. As long as I walk, she must live. Please tell her, this time I won't let her down. When Harold hung up and stepped out of the phone box, his heart was pounding so fast it felt too big for his chest. With trembling fingers, he unpeeled the flap of his own envelope and pulled out the reply. Cramming it against the glass of the kiosk, he scribbled a P.S. Wait for me, H. He posted the letter without noticing its loss. Harold stared at the ribbon of road that lay ahead and the glowering wall that was Dartmoor, and then the yachting shoes that were on his feet. He asked himself what in heaven's name he'd just done. Overhead, a seagull cracked its wings and laughed.
Oh, thank you so much. Did you read this for the tape version? No?
No, I didn't. I never have done the audio versions, but Jim Broadbent, the actor, did it. And I felt so lucky that he did it. And if you ever get the chance, or if anyone does ever get the chance to listen to it, it's worth it because he does it so beautifully. He just is Harold.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. But boy, that was lovely to listen to. You've said that this is a love story, not a romance, but a love story. And you've also said that it's a coming of age novel. Would you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, I mean, I call it a love story in the sense that it starts with a marriage that's been, dead. On hold for 20 years, which is a very long time for two people to just, they've stayed together, but they've become accustomed to not really speaking to one another. And there is kind of no way out of that. You know, when people get to a place where they're blocked, they're locked in something. And so the letter that inspires this walk actually forces them both to reassess themselves and their marriage. And it becomes a love story in the sense that Harold does a journey which takes him the length of England, and Maureen, his wife, stays at home, kind of in lockdown before I'd even heard of lockdown, but within four walls does another huge journey. And so as well as it being about, can Harold do this walk? Can Queenie live? It's about a marriage and whether two people can move to a place where they can overcome something that was so big 20 years ago. They buried it. And in terms of a coming of age, I think it is Maureen's coming of age too, but really it's about Harold's reawakening and kind of discovery of his place in the world.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Let's move to Miss Benson's Beetle. It was an immediate New York Times bestseller. Congratulations on that. It's an absolutely delightful book, rich with humanity, with characterizations. The dialogue is really wonderful to read. Sometimes you read it a few times over because it's so much fun to read. It's about the unlikely friendship between two very different women. And I wondered if you could give us a reading first about Marjorie Benson.
Yes, I can. I mean, what I could do is, again, I've got a different jacket.
I love that cover. Could you hold that up again?
I will hold it up.
That cover. It made me desperate to have a gold Beetle, I have to tell you. It really did. Gorgeous cover.
I do love the American one though. I really love it because I think it's such a vibrant, joyful. I really love it. I love those colors. Anyway, I mean, I wondered about reading a little bit later on of Marjorie, which will give you a taste of her later on, but then I would maybe have to just introduce the book just slightly, because obviously it's only recently come out, but that it is about Marjorie Benson, who as a child heard about this golden beetle from her father on the other side of the world in an island called New Caledonia, and decided that she one day would like to find it. And then life just has not provided her with any of those opportunities. And when we next find her, she's in her mid-40s, and she's led a pretty hidden kind of life where she just hasn't fulfilled any of the things she hoped she would do. Anyway, she just decides, a bit like Harold, I think I have a soft spot for people who decide to do things kind of spontaneously and kind of without any backup. She decides to go and find this beetle, look for this beetle, just to kind of really try to find it. But she needs an assistant, because it's set in 1950. And so she advertises for an assistant, and the woman she ends up with is the last woman on the planet she would like to be with. New Caledonia, when Marjorie, who struggles, she's very set in her ways and she struggles all along the way. But this is the first moment when Enid, her assistant, finds a rock pool and dives straight into it. "Come on, Marge." Enid smacked the water with her fists and shouted to make echoes. "Yahoo! I'm alive!" Then she plunged underwater and her hair moved like a sea anemone. Mr. Rawlings, the dog, looked up at Marjorie. She looked down at him. He closed his mouth and stopped panting as if he expected her to say something. "After you," she said. The dog continued to stare at her. He clearly had no intention of getting wet, and neither did she. But he was a dog, a useless one, and she was a human being. In order to prove herself the superior species, she took off her boots and shorts, though she drew the line at removing her top, or indeed her underwear. The water was ice cold. It was like being bitten. It even seemed to snap at her bones. But she held on to a root until it broke in her hands and she lost her footing, and suddenly the water was not up to her knees, it was up to her chest, then her chin, it was in her mouth, ice cold water, and her head was going under. She threw out her arms, she struck furiously. She began, if not to swim, then at least to stop drowning. Once she choked and went under again, but kept going. She reached the other side where she could touch the bottom, but she did not get out. She stayed staring up at the thundering cascade of water and a dark green pine clump, and above them, the sky as blue as a piece of glass. And just for a moment, she could have sworn she heard something inside her, groaning with pleasure and whispering, "Oh, Marjorie Benson, what was that beautiful, crazy thing that you just did?"
Lovely.
So
And that, I guess that says a lot about both of them too, that kind of exuberance that Enid had. If I could just interject, you began writing this novel knowing really nothing about beetles or New Caledonia. And it strikes me that you're the kind of reader who lets the book tell you rather than the other way around, and that you write to discover something. It was author Alexander Heman said, "Expertise is the enemy of the imagination." And I think this is really borne out by what I've read about what you've said about the way you write, that you let it lead you. I wonder if you'd talk about that little interview you heard about the cryptozoologist. And there are two things I'm interested in with this book: an experience you had with a clairvoyant, and then with the cryptozoologist. I think we all know what clairvoyant is, but if you could explain what a cryptozoologist is.
Of course I will, because I didn't know. This was years and years ago, because for me, books kind of take a very, very, very long time to percolate. You know, it's like something very, very slow cook. So years and years ago, when my children were really small, I heard an interview on the radio with a cryptozoologist. And I didn't know what a cryptozoologist is. And for those who don't, it's the science. Those scientists say it isn't a science. So they would go, it's the science, which is I hate that. But anyway, that's what they would say. It's the science of proving the existence of the existence of animals whose existence has not yet been proved. So basically, the Loch Ness Monster is the kind of far end of the scale. It's creatures that they might exist because they've been referred to, say, in mythology or in poetry or in, legend or in fairy tales, but there is some tiny reason to believe they might exist. But these people are trying to prove that they do. So this poor man on the radio was being given a really hard time, and I really felt for him. But I also thought how fantastic that your science is based on literature, really, and then that must also require some knowledge, some science. That must require faith, which I find interesting, and then imagination, as you were saying earlier, because in order to make the leap from what is and what isn't, it seems to me you've got to have a really wild imagination. So for all those reasons, I thought this is a really interesting place for me to go. And then I thought, well, I don't really want to write about the Loch Ness Monster because that's just way too big for me. But a tiny golden beetle that you could tread on as easily as find, that really, really interests me. So that was what kind of that. So a very long time ago, I thought that's what I'm going to write about, but I didn't know who was going to look for it. I think I had an idea that I would send a man off looking for it. And then as I was writing my last book, The Music Shop, I just began to ask myself, why are you not writing for women? Why are you not putting women at the heart of your writing? And I then felt very strongly that I needed to write a book. Actually, I intended to write a book that was only women. It was going to be a purely women's story. But I very much wanted to look at two women in relationship with one another, but not women who were, the wives of some men that would then appear, or daughters, that these women were simply with one another, that, that is their experience and our experience of them. So this is a kind of very long way of saying how the book found me, or I found it. I don't know quite how how you like to put it, but anyway, we came together. So I realized Beatles, I realized two women, but I also had, in terms of the clairvoyant, this is going to sound a little bit out there, but for a little while, I'd had a feeling that there were these two women around me, and I didn't really know who they were. I mean, they weren't ghosts. There was just a sense of a kind of energy, and it's been there for a very, very long time. And after my father died, so this is before I wrote Harold Fry, I went to visit, no, I rang a clairvoyant. I was much too scared to go myself. I rang. And we had a phone call, which actually was quite tough, because really what I wanted her to say was, your dad is, here, and he really loves you. That's all I really wanted to hear. But what she said was, who are the two women? And I thought nothing of it. And then a little later, I thought, yeah, who are they? Because I sensed them. So as I was writing Miss Benson's Beetle, I thought, of course, these two women have been hanging around me for a very, very long time. And I found them remarkably easy to write. I just felt I had to listen, and I loved writing them. I found them really empowering to write, because they together have such an extraordinary energy that, as you said, I didn't see coming. Didn't know that was going to happen.
Were you surprised by a lot of scenes that took place in this book?
Yes, I was. I mean, there was some, what happens for me when I'm writing on the whole is that initially when I really start writing, I just write what comes into my head. Like scenes that I won't have planned them, because I'm just going with something or other. It's kind of instinct, I guess. I'm just seeing what it is. And a lot of it I reject. It's, I don't need it. A lot of it is me getting to know the characters. And actually the reader doesn't need to know that. I do, but the reader doesn't. But I think that is part of that stage where things come up that you think, well, I didn't know that was going to happen, but actually, yeah, that does interest me or surprises me. I think being surprised as a reader as a writer and a reader is always valuable.
I do too. Otherwise, it feels like homework.
Yes.
How about, let's see, would you want to do another reading from Miss Benson?
I will. I thought maybe just to even things out, I should just give you a little bit of Enid when she first appears. So Enid Pretty is everything that Marjorie Benson is not. And Marjorie is, they meet, the first time they meet is actually when they are departing to go, they're on their way. Everything has gone wrong, and Marjorie has at the last minute appealed to Enid Pretty to become her assistant, having rejected her very early on. And this is the moment where she first meets her at the station on the way to make this incredibly long journey to New Caledonia. The short woman tottered across the concourse, her luggage so heavy she could only wave at Marjorie with her foot. Her hair was a stiff mat at her round-busted hips, tiny sandals with a pom-pom at the toe, and her nails were painted like juicy sweets. She was a blonde bombshell, 25 if she was a day, and Marjorie was old enough to be, if not her mother, then at least her maiden aunt. "What are you lot all staring at?" she said to the crowd, at which point it wisely stopped staring and moved on. Being close and also half Marjorie's size, she had to tilt her face upwards to speak. She was wearing so much makeup that her face was orange. Her mouth, by contrast, was bright pink, her eyelashes thick and black. And then there was her hair, which was such a luminous shade of yellow you could have shut her in the dark and still found her. Only her eyes were natural, dark green with tiny gold flecks. "Enid Pretty," she said merrily, as if announcing her arrival at a party. Marjorie was speechless. There was less chance of this woman blending into the background than there was of Marjorie winning a beauty pageant. The humiliation she had suffered while waiting and the terrible hurt that had been dealt her by Miss Hamilton, along with something else, something so old she couldn't even name it, all these things now regroup themselves into a base longing to lash out at Enid and humiliate her, as if it was completely normal to wear safari hats in railway stations and completely odd to go without them. She pointed at Enid's tiny excuse of a hat. "What is that? Beg pardon? What are you wearing?" Enid blinked. "Clothes and stuff," she said, all question mark. "This isn't a cheap holiday to Butlins. It's a field trip to the South Pacific. The post is no longer available." She was turning to pick up her luggage when Enid grabbed Marjorie's elbow. She had shocking strength for someone so small and brightly coloured. "Please," she hissed, "don't do this to me, Marge." The way she said it implied they'd been friends for a long time, and what Marjorie was about to do was the kind of thing she always did, and for once in her life, she should try doing something better. Marjorie pulled herself free. She reached for her Gladstone bag. But in her desperation to get away, she made the move too fast, igniting a flash of pain right through her hip. Her body pitched forward, and for a terrible moment, she thought her leg was coming off. It hurt just to breathe. Enid bent close. "Marge, why aren't you moving? We need to hurry." "It's nothing," she said, "only my hip." "Your hip?" Enid shouted, as if Marjorie was not only disabled for the moment, but also deaf as a post. "It gets stuck. Do you want me to whack it?" "No, please, please, do not whack my hip. I might fall over." Enid cast a terrified look towards the platforms. "We've got to hurry, Marge. We can't miss our train." Then something seemed to click in her mind and she said, "Right, I'll sort this. Wait."
That's great. I was thinking about your doing research for this book and calling an entomologist and wondering how you even know what to ask when you yourself know so little about insects and the beetle in particular. And by the way, there is a gold beetle, isn't there?
There is a gold beetle. So then I had to really do my research with the entomologists to find out which golden beetles there aren't. And the golden beetle that I discovered, I say that as if I found it myself, the golden beetle that this particular entomologist helped me find, said this one hasn't been found yet, but it might be found. There's a possibility. So it was all very elaborate, but in terms of the questions I asked them, one of them was just because at the beginning of my research, I knew nothing about beetles, but also I wasn't scared of them, but as a child, I'd seen something in the ground when I was about 4, 5, that terrified me so much. I ran back to our house and fetched my dad, and he came back with me because I said I'd seen a monster. And he said, that's a stag beetle. And then he said, and actually the stag beetle is more afraid of you than you are of it. And it was one of those moments where you realize that something has a name. It's given an identity. And I mean, I'm not for boundaries, but being given this identity made me appreciate its difference from me. I could kind of not be scared of it. So I did have that kind of relationship with beetles, but I didn't really know very much at all. So one of the first questions I asked entomologists is why are you so passionate about them?
Mm.
It was really interesting. And then, I mean, it was particularly interesting for me to meet women who are entomologists, just to learn how different it is for women on the field than it is for men, even now. And the kind of things that women come up against that men don't.
Mm-hmm. Why were they so passionate about beetles?
There were many reasons, but one which became one of mine is just the fact that they are designed so brilliantly, that they have these 2 sets of wings. So they have this outer set of wings, which are sort of like a shell, but then which kind of split and open. And then the wings beneath are the actual flying wings, which are made of this kind of remarkably fine material, for want of a better word. But the beetle can't fly without both sets. Mm-hmm. And it was one of those moments where you kind of think, oh, I see, and I'm writing about 2 women who really need, who can't function without one another. So it was just a bit kind of one of those ping moments as a writer when you think, oh, this works, this idea, this meshes up together for me. So that was one of the things that people loved. I mean, another was just the how many of them there are. So they are brilliant at adapting. They're kind of the best survivors, really, but how they just quietly get on with it. They're not like butterflies that are just so beautiful. Everybody goes, oh, butterflies, they're so lovely. Beetles are just kind of really getting on with the work, and they exist on anything. They're everywhere. And then I think one woman who I really liked said to me, they're just so plucky.
That's great.
I thought, well, you've sold them now.
When you talked about the fact that they have 2 sets of wings serving as a kind of metaphor for what you were writing, I looked up that gold beetle, and the one I read about said that if you disturb it, it will lose the gold color. It changes color. And that seemed to me to be a metaphor for what you were doing as well, especially if you are the kind of writer who gives it over to the universe, so to speak, to let those things happen that need to happen in the writing of the book. It feels to me that there is something beyond you when you're writing, and that once you settle into something, I wonder, does it feel like then things start to happen to accommodate that process?
Yes, it does. So for me, I always liken it to, suppose you went into a wood and you saw a house in the middle of the wood and you really wanted to go in, which is what it feels like to me when I start kind of working on a book. And then you realize there's no way in. and all you can do is go round and round and round it and get to know it. And then you find just a little tiny chink, through which you can maybe poke one finger. And very slowly, you just begin to kind of find out what it is. But I think the voice of a book takes a long time to come to me. Not just the characters. The characters take a very long time, but just, the kind of, and I don't even mean the message, the theme of the book, but the voice of it. So Miss Benson's Beetle has a kind of very robust voice, I think, quite an extrovert voice. And the irony is that I started off promising my editor that I was going to write a very quiet, short book about two women. And it was going to be very tender and very beautiful, very, very quiet. And then I started writing it. And these two women, there was no way they were going to be quiet. And that was a gift. And it was a gift for me as a writer because it forced me to be more bold for this particular book. And, even if I don't do that again, it was great. It was wonderful to have a kind of a go at that. An adventure story,
Yeah, you said about this book that you wanted it to be a page turner, that you wanted it. Oh, you said a lot of stuff about that. A page turner and sort of tender and adventure. And you succeeded in all that, I have to say. Well, you always have humor too, but this maybe because it's the most recent one I've read, it seemed to be full of humor. I think when you talk about doing research, it reminds me of what a lift that can be to the psyche, to understand that there are things about which you know nothing that are so full and beautiful, and the way that you came to them is through writing. I mean, you find out about a beetle and whole worlds open up. It seems to me to be a very hopeful thing.
I'd never thought of it as hopeful before, but I suppose you're right. It is. I mean, that's a very bad beginning. It's about 6 beginnings to an answer, isn't it? But I like writing about things I don't know. I know I'm going to go on a journey, and I'm very willing to go on a journey into what I don't know. So I've never written before about a country I don't know. That was quite a bold move, but I did start this book, thinking I was going to set it in England, as I normally do. And then I just began to write it, and I just felt, oh, this is supposed to be an adventure. Where's the adventure? And then I also felt that if it was truly an adventure story, it had to have a kind of energy that had to come from my imagination. And so that was when I thought, hang on, you've got to write about somewhere you don't know. So you've got to do a lot of research. And I did. And also, if you're going to research, country in 1950s, you've got to, and there were a lot of journals I found and pamphlets, and there was even a kind of introduction to New Caledonia for American troops, because so many soldiers were posted there during the Second World War. So I found that little pamphlet, and that was kind of an introduction to the island and how to speak French. Oh dear, what am I saying? So this was all part of my challenge to myself to write in a way that I wanted to take away all my props, all my familiar things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that yields pure gold, really, to just let it have its way, so to speak. And it's almost like a black hole. Sometimes you're doing research and and there's more and more and more, so that it becomes a function of your editing down to what fills the bill over here. But how wonderful to have learned everything that you have in the process. Do you have a gold beetle? Do you have a little gold beetle necklace?
Well, look, I have actually, but I'm not wearing them. Got some earrings, but I've also got this. I became the kind of person that everybody sends gold beetles to.
I knew it.
My sister gave me this last year for Christmas.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Which is rather lovely.
Wow. That's
Fun to have here.
even better than the cute little necklace I saw on Etsy.
Yes.
Speaking of your sister and your husband and you are all actors, are or were.
Yeah.
I would never want to play charades with you guys.
Oh, yeah, you do. I'm terrible at it. I'm really, really bad at it. I think I better get a bit too, I overthink it. Whereas also, I know. So there's a lot of it over Christmas, obviously, and normally I just back out. I can't cope with it. But this was one of the things about having a very quiet Christmas this year was actually, it was just me and my husband and the children. And actually I did manage to play charades, but I'm terrible at it. I try to act something out and I just a load of blank faces. I just get much too complicated.
Bad reviews right away, right?
Yeah.
I'm aware that we have about 4 minutes, which isn't long enough, but I want to leave time for the audience to ask questions too. But when you and your sister were children, were you all the time play acting and writing plays?
Yeah, I mean, I've got two sisters, and we were always, well, I was always writing tiny books for them. I think I had this romantic idea that we were a bit like the Brontes, but, you know, with good teeth and, you know, without the kind of typhoid and all the rest of it. And so I think I did sort of establish all this. I mean, I used to write tiny, tiny books for my sisters, and I think I kind of hoped that they would join in, and they were never really quite as interested as I was in that whole thing. But we did play a lot.
Play act, yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think that you get from writing that you didn't get from acting, and vice versa?
Oh, well, I mean, I always wrote, but I didn't really feel ready to write, to show anyone my writing in my 20s. And I think I was right, looking back. But it doesn't mean that it's not useful what you're doing. And I think it, you know, you're learning it, and you're reading, and you're just storing things up. But I think the muscles are quite similar, the acting muscles and the writing muscles. And I think it's to do with what you were saying earlier. It's that imaginative leap from what you know to what you don't know, and being willing to make that leap. And I think the other myth about actors is that they're extroverts, which, you know, I definitely wasn't. So it was almost as if when I was on stage, I had a voice that I felt I didn't really have in my own private life. And I think it's the same with writing for me, and for a lot of people. It's an easier way, or it feels a more truthful way often to express myself than when I just walk into a room and spout, because I reflect.
And I think the empathy that an actor needs to feel toward the characters whom he portrays is present also in the writing. It feels very real to me. All your characters seem fully inhabited, as though you really do turn into them when you're writing them, and it makes for such a satisfying read. It is said that writers write about the same thing over and over again. When you look back at your body of work, do you feel that that's true in any way?
Yes, I mean, I think it is true. I am drawn to people who find themselves on the outside of things, you know, kind of I mean, unlikely has become my word, but unlikely friendships, unlikely heroes. That I'm drawn to that place, but probably on a deeper level, I'm quite interested, or I naturally go to people who are still in some kind of grieving process.
Mhm.
I feel that pull, and I think it's partly because I feel that I still am, even though my dad died so many years ago, I think it's still very present for me, his loss. So, and a lot of people will know that feeling.
It, it, when I was asking myself this question about your books, I thought, well, these are, at least most broadly, journeys, not only of the self, not only to learn about the self, but to serve others, that they seem to come to a place of recognition of how important other people are and how to love them, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, yes, definitely those things move me. And as you were saying, I think you have to write about what moves you. And I mean, I often watch people and see something that I find just, tugs or twists at me, or makes me want to know more, or at least imagine more.
Mm-hmm. And last question is that you described in an interview I read that you work in a caravan, and I thought, what's that? But it's a trailer, isn't it? Is that where you are now?
Well, I'm not. No, I'm not. I'm actually up in the house at the moment because it's very dark, and it's like now somebody gave me the word for it. We would call it, I mean, a shepherd's hut. So it's I don't always get that far. Sometimes I just stay at the kitchen table, but and I'm often tempted not to get that far. But I know if I do get that far, I'll just be my head is truly free to kind of go wherever it wants to go. And I do have an amazing view from it. So I'm very lucky.
Yeah, yeah. When you decided that you needed to be out on the land, that seemed like such a good decision to me. I have that same calling inside myself, and I wonder, was it an idea that you had and had to talk to your family about and sort of persuade them to that point of view?
Well, to begin with, in this house, there was a little shed at the back, and I wrote in there. But then we had to demolish the shed in order to slightly extend the kitchen, because I didn't grow, but my children just kept growing, and our house became way too small, and we just needed an extra room. So my shed had to go. So the deal was that if my shed went, I could have this shepherd's hut instead out in the field, which seemed a very good deal to me. So that's where I go. And sometimes I go through, I mean, it has been quite snowy, but it can be particularly wet out there and muddy. So I do feel I have to do a bit of a trek to get there. But once I'm there, I do feel very, very lucky just to have this space where I mean, looking at the sky and the field. And sometimes people, it's got a public footpath, not too close that everybody notices me, but close enough that I notice them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's so important for artists of all kind to have that room of their own, so to speak, and to know that probably you're not going to be interrupted or distracted by all the things that go on in a house. But when it's cold, then you have to talk yourself into making the trek. Okay, I want to open this to questions from the audience. I wish you'd just come over, Rachel. Come on over.
I'd so love that.
Thank you very much for your time and all your answers. And I'll turn it over to Erin.
That was so wonderful. I hope the both of you felt all the energy from the couple hundred people who are on today's program. I've got a couple things. I know the questions are going to start popping in, but I want to just read something Amy Pershini. I don't think that's right. Amy, you know who I'm
She's
talking
an
about. Amy.
artist. She's an artist. I know who she is. She's an
Great.
artist. Yeah.
She wrote, my oldest sister and I shared book ideas with each other. She told me about Harold Fry when it was a new book. I read it and loved it. Then I suggested it to my book club and we all loved it. Very sadly, my sister died almost 6 years ago and I really miss our book sharing talks. So, that's just another way that your book has connected people. And I told you before we came on that my mother-in-law gave me your book, Harold Fry, years ago, and I read it, and that, has connected she and I. So just another way your careers have a different meaning. I hope you guys feel the love, so much love. And there are people who just kind of like, I don't even know what it's connected to in the chat. It's like, I love that testimony. What a wonderful reading. Wow, that's a great analogy. I'm sure they know what it's connected to. But so there is a question here from Heidi. Heidi, I'm going to unmute you. So.
Well, can I just say that the testimony was about the kind of psychic that she was had. I appreciated that so much, and that she was surrounded by kind of the spirits of the women that were helping her write. And kind of along those lines, I was wondering if there's ever too much research.
Yeah, that's such a good question. And there is always a danger of too much research. Although I think so long as you're curious, it's an interesting path to go on. But there comes a point where it's not helpful to the book. So you can continue doing it, but you can't, because this is fiction. It's not non-fiction for me. So the story has got to kick in and the characters have got to kick in. And I don't really like wearing my research on my sleeve. So it's only there in terms of it being it being truthful for the characters, for the story, for the place. But in terms of showing off, I think it's not a good idea because that's about my ego, which I think should always be at the door, on the other side of the door. But also I think research sometimes can be a kind of place of hiding, that you can think, well, if I just keep researching, I don't need to commit. And at some point, as we were saying earlier, I think imaginatively, you do have to say, right, I'm going to trust my instinct, I'm going to trust my imagination, and I'm going to make a leap.
That's a great answer. Anne Lamas wants me to ask this question for you. She wants to know, Rachel, if you have any many artists in your family tree.
Gosh, what a good question. I know that my grandfather was a watercolor painter.
Oh.
And my grandmother was too, but he was the one who did it professionally. And actually what he ended up doing were these postcards. I don't know if you get them, but we have them here. It's like a postcard with a picture with the county. It will be a painting, a little bit, and then it's got little kind of cartoon characters. So it's sort of a bit like a miniature Harold Fry, but by county, by county, by county. So I'd never thought of that before, but there was definitely that on one side. But my dad was also an architect, and I think architects are very interesting in that they kind of combine what I was saying earlier, that mixture for me of science and kind of art.
That's awesome. I'm gonna jump in really quickly on a personal note. Elizabeth and Rachel know that my internet has been a little wobbly. So if I do freeze for a second, you guys just jump in and start singing or something, and I'll come right back in, okay? But what we're going to do next is honor Freeman. So I'm going to ask the question. Rachel, do you have a book that floats around in your consciousness, that like a beetle that may exist, doesn't actually come into being? Any books that you sense might be waiting to show themselves?
Oh yes, I do. I'm at that stage when actually I think I have made a commitment, so now I'm not quite there anymore. But that stage when you finished a book, and Elizabeth must know this as well, when you finished and then you're waiting to see what the next one is going to be, and you feel a bit like an empty house, and you're being squatted by various ideas who wanting you to take them on, and you're just kind of finding out whether you really want to go with them, and whether and they really want to go with you. So there is always a stage where there are about 10 possible books, I would say. And it's quite exhausting because you have to invest in them all to a point to kind of, so that's about, I don't know, 10 books times all the characters. That's about 100 people in my head. That's
And
more
that's fantastic. I've
Oh,
managed to
Donna.
unmute
Hey,
I'm
Honor.
here.
myself.
Well, thank you
Yes,
for
I'm
the
here.
question.
And Elizabeth's right. I'm in New Zealand, but I'm originally from England. So
Oh,
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. The next question we're gonna have from is actually my illustrious mother-in-law, who I keep bringing up. She has a question for you. So Mary, just unmute yourself. There she is. Hi, Mary.
Hi there. Hi, Erin. Hi, Elizabeth and Rachel. Rachel, I absolutely loved Harold Fry, and I did give it to Erin for Christmas not too long ago. But yes, I'm originally to New Caledonia, and can you? Wow, it sounds like such an interesting place.
yeah, well, I haven't been, and it looks as if I won't be able to go for a little while. But I made a decision that it didn't matter that I wasn't going to be able to go. To begin with, it really worried me in the same way that it really worried me that, to begin with, that I hadn't walked the walk that Harold Fry does, that I didn't know every step of the way. And then there comes a point, as I was saying earlier, so I don't want to be boring, but where you just go, hang on a minute, this isn't nonfiction. So actually, there are things, there are emotional sides of the story that have got to kick in. There are other things. So it's fine that I'm not going to walk the length of England. And it's also okay that I can't go to New Caledonia, because I think I had such a yearning to go that it kind of came into the book. I think it infiltrated the book. And there were things that I decided early on. I thought, I know there's a red mountain. I know they're trekking up a red mountain. I had no idea what color the mountains are in New Caledonia, but would you believe it? There's a red mountain, so then you kind of think, well, so something's working here. This is an island about which I know nothing, but clearly I know something somewhere. So why not just go with that?
That's
But
wonderful.
I would love to go.
We have a question from Nancy Fletcher. Nancy, I'm unmuting you. There you
Hi,
are.
thank you. I was wondering, you said you have all these characters in your head waiting, but when you wrote Howard Fry, did you already have Queenie's story waiting in the background?
Oh, yes. No, I didn't. I hadn't a clue that I was going to write Queenie's story. In fact, I was very definite when I finished Harold Fry that the story was done. And then it was only really through doing events like this where I talked about Harold, and then I talked about Queenie, and I talked about her cancer, because there were a few people who really, really objected to the way I wrote Queenie. And I had to explain to them that that was my dad's cancer. So I had to be true to what I knew in that instance. I had to write what I'd seen. But the more I talked about my dad in that way, the more I felt, well, I'm just presenting him as a man who was dying. I'm not giving, this is a smidge of the man. you know, he loved so many other things. And then I thought about Queenie, and I thought, I've just presented her right at the end of her life, but there's a woman here who's a very interesting woman to me, not least because she didn't say very much. And I thought, well, it would be very interesting, so long as I don't repeat anything that the reader's already read, if I do that thing which a camera can do, where you turn it the other way, you get the other shot. And when I had that idea, I thought, I was really excited. And the moment I had that idea, and I was supposed to be writing something else, I got the title for the book just that night. That night I started dreaming it, and I just thought, well, I've got to go with this now. This is happening. And it was the fastest thing I've written.
That's great. We are quickly running out of time. I had 3 to 4 people ask me. Elizabeth back in December gave us a wonderful list of books that she recommends that she has read recently. Rachel, do you have 1 or 2 books that are either on your nightstand or you've read recently that has touched you that you can recommend to the attendees?
Well, I know that you've talked about monogamy, but I was blown away by that. I mean, really blown away by that. So I'm now a huge Sue Miller fan. But I'm also, I read another book that I really loved by a Canadian writer called Elizabeth Hay, All Things Consoled, which is nonfiction and is about her parents at the end of their lives. And it reminded me of Richard Ford, actually. It reminded me of Between Them, which is one of my favorite pieces of nonfiction. So those have been beside me. I mean, I read a lot of new fiction that hasn't come out yet because I really want to support people who are writers who are starting off. But I haven't yet read Jack, the Marilyn Robinson, and that's my next treat.
Awesome.
That's a good one. Speaking of Richard Ford, Erin.
Wow, that segue just somehow worked itself in. Great news, everybody who is either a Richard Ford fan or wants to become a Richard Ford fan. Our February Writing Matters 19th Century collaboration is Richard Ford. And that is going to be on the most romantic day in February, February 14th. Let's be honest, you're not going out to dinner or lunch anyway, so you might as well curl up around your laptop with your sweetie and watch that program. I got this emailed to me, so I do want to ask one last question. Debbie here, who is one of our members, is it wants to write about her family history, and I believe both of you have written semi-autobiographical stuff, and I feel like she just wants to know, do you think writing chronologically is the best way to do something that's so personal, and so, you know, it's not fiction, it is nonfiction because it's about your own life? Would you approach it chronologically, or would you approach it maybe large milestone by large milestone?
Gosh, well, it's not something I've kind of specifically done, but I'm thinking about it at the moment. And personally, I don't know what Elizabeth would say, but I would kind of go for the moment with the things that feel big to you, that feel like scenes, that feel like something you can present, you know, and write, and are places you want to go. You want to kind of pry open. And then I would sort of see what you've got and find a shape. But I would let it surprise you.
I agree, and I for me as a writer, and I know that all writers work differently, but for me to predetermine something takes all the energy out of it. I think the more you can let the thing tell you how it wants to be shaped, the better. I do agree that to find those scenes, if you will, that have the most heat for you are the ones that you should start with, because it'll encourage you to keep going. You may end up doing things chronologically, or you may not, but just write those things that really mean something to you and that you really feel, and then see how you can arrange them.
Yeah, because you can always puzzle it together when you're done
Yeah.
and see which pieces fit together and were the right order then.
Yeah, nobody needs to see anything you're writing until you're ready for them to see it. And that can be very freeing to realize that. I want to say one more thing, which is that we have been at Writing Matters. We have been so lucky to work with the 19th Century, and they have a building to maintain, they have staff, and if you have enjoyed this program or others, please consider donating even $5, even $3, whatever you feel like. Really goes a long way toward helping out a really wonderful organization and keeps us able to do this, because I don't know how to do it. I can only do it if someone sends me a link, and then I just have to do one thing, and that's what they do.
Well, we really appreciate this collaboration as well. You know, Elizabeth and Bill have just become just members, partners, friends, and we really appreciate it as well. And before I give my end spiel, Elizabeth and Rachel, anything else you want to add? Just one last thought or comment?
I just want to thank you again so much. I've so been looking forward to this, and you are so delightful. And if you have enjoyed Rachel here, there are other interviews online that you can see that are really delightful. And the books, read them all. Just go get them all and read them right away, because you'll feel better about life. The end.
Rachel,
I don't know what to say to that apart from thank you.
Well, if you did like this program and you want to see what else we have, our Monday programs start back up tomorrow. Just go to our website, www.19thcentury.org, and they're Mondays in the afternoon, and you can register just like you did for this one. And they range from art, music, literature. Tomorrow is actually our scholarship program. We have a wonderful program where we give college scholarships, and we're getting to know the people a little bit more. Did I freeze? Oh, I made it so far. And then if you do want to give us a donation, you can also go on our website, 19thcentury.org, for programs, all information about more about us. But before I freeze again, I'm going to say, let's have a great 2021. I can't wait to see what we're all able to do, and I can't wait till we can all just do the biggest group hug in the world. Have a great day, everybody, from the 19th Century, from Writing Matters, from Elizabeth, Rachel, and I. Have a wonderful day. Goodbye.